Hello, ladies and gents. This is A. Gerds, and a week ago, I found out that BIONICLE Generation 2 had been canceled. And while I wasn't really a big fan of Generation 2, I was still very shocked that the reboot to one of my most beloved childhood things had only lasted an entire year. I mean, wow, a year. That's pretty bad. And I was going to do like what a lot of people have been doing and are still doing every now and then. And I was going to, say, I think BIONICLE Generation 2 ended like this. And, I think it would have done better if it done this, that, and the other. Or Lego would have done better doing this, that, and the other. All that. And I was going to do that, but I figured, the news came out a week ago. So that's kind of irrelevant. And, that sort of thing is kind of irrelevant. And, yesterday I was talking to a friend about all this. We were just, Generation 2 got this right, got this wrong, and doing the same with Generation 1. Just going back and forth on the two subjects or whatever. When I got off, I was like, okay, I'm gonna make my whole, 2 cents on Generation 2. And but then I started getting these ideas. I started thinking, what would I have done with Generation 2 type thing. And one of the reasons why I didn't care for Generation 2 as much was because it felt like it took way too much from Generation 1. Which I'm not going to go into major details over that because that would be a whole other entire video. But basically, I just felt that they took too much from the plot. They used the same character names, and they're still looking for masks. It's the exact same quest that is it's like a huge thing in Generation 1. And to me, it's one thing to have an Easter egg to Generation 1, but to have so much taken and recycled from Generation 1. I was disappointed. That was my major reason for being disappointed with Generation 2. But I could talk about that all day, and that's not what this video is about. This video, I'm going to be reading a little thing that I wrote. It's titled Generation 3 because it's if I were to start BIONICLE up for a third time, this is kind of how I would do it. And so yeah, I'm going to get started on that. It's not terribly long. It's 2 pages. And I'd love to hear y'all's opinion about it and, I don't know, brainstorm a little bit, improve it if anybody's interested. So here we go. All right. BIONICLE Generation 3. The setting is a city island known simply as Roaco, and the city itself is simpler than the name. When imagining Roaco, do not let your mind wander to images as grand as Metronui. No building or tower is as simple or as beautiful or as tall as any found in Metronui, and nothing is made of protodermis. The buildings are composed of simple stone blocks and wooden beams. Most only reach 2 to 4 stories in height. The only building that is tall and grand is the castle, which is referred to respectfully as the Blue Fortress. It earned its name because it is made up of a rare clay that is dyed blue, a clay that is tougher than stone and more durable than wood. While the Blue Fortress is a rather breathtaking sight, the rest of the city is in a pitiful state of muck and wear. The island is in a perpetual state of rain and sleet, and has been for centuries. The city is in constant need of repairs due to the water damage, and the job of going out to find resources is a frightening one at best. While the city's architecture has little to be impressed by, there's little to be impressed by the city's architecture, except for the fortress, of course. The city itself is very expansive, taking up a good 1/3 of the entire island. Only half of the city is made up of buildings, though. The rest is made up of pasture and woodland type areas, for the inhabitants do their best to provide as much building material and food inside the city as possible. If resources become scarce, they must go outside the city walls, where they have to work hard and be wary in order to survive long enough to get enough materials and food. Why is everything like this, you might ask? Well, see, thousands of years ago, the island was colonized by the present inhabitants today that are known as the Aguaran, the Zigranites, and the Varani. All right, Aguaran, Zigranites, and Varani. And 6 powerful beings known either as the Builders or the Makuta. While the first 3 mentioned inhabitants were essentially different breeds of the same species, the Okaline, the Builders were a different set of beings entirely. Their lifeblood was incredibly powerful and blessed the Builders to do what the name suggests: build and create. Not to say that cities and creatures rose out of thin air, but the Builders were capable of manipulating the environment around them in strange ways and used this to make many tools and works of art that housed and benefited the Okaline. They were loved by the villagers whom they led, and the Builders, or to some, the Makuta, led the new inhabitants wisely and with respect. However, not all were happy to be co-rulers. The builder known as Azravan was a cunning and powerful individual. His works of art were some of the most stunning, his spires and walls some of the most durable compared to his siblings. Countless inhabitants and even a few of his own brethren praised his work, but Azravan was not satisfied with this. He wanted more. His ambition and greed made him hungry, and he eventually aspired to become the one ruler of Roako and its peoples. However, he knew he couldn't do it alone. For a long time, Azravan plotted and planned, his schemes so well hidden and so patiently and subtly executed that not even his brothers and sisters saw what he was doing. They were so used to being at peace and being satisfied with what they had accomplished, they never even thought that any of their own would be that much hungrier. For at least 100 years, Azravan set everything into motion, and then came the time to recruit a few of his brethren. He had spied on them closely, trying to see which of them might be the most willing to join him, and he finally chose at least 3 to be his lackeys. The first 2 he seduced into his plans were his brother, Elevod, and his sister, Calavid. The 2 hadn't known it at the time, but with a few talks with their brother, they realized that they wouldn't have minded ruling larger portions of the island city. They wouldn't have minded ruling larger portions of the island city, or at least that's what Azravan led them to believe. When Azravan attempted to talk his other brother into joining his ranks, Uravak, the scheming builder found that he had made a grave error revealing his plans to this one. While Uravak had at times yearned for something more, wanted something more, apparently he did not want it at the expense of his other siblings and the inhabitants. Taken by surprise by this previously unseen streak of loyalty, Azravan was not prepared for his brother's powerful strike and was dazed long enough for Uravak to escape. Uravak was smart. He knew he would not be able to defeat Azravan, Calavid, and Elevod alone. So the Makuta sought the aid of his 2 last brother and sister, Remain and Alevin. These 2 siblings were infuriated by the betrayal as Uravak, and so they planned to retaliate against Azravan's plan. However, Azravan and his 2 cohorts did not give them enough time to make a proper plan of attack. The evil siblings wreaked havoc upon their fellow Makuta's creations and lands, and they destroyed enough that their siblings could not delay any longer if they wanted to save the inhabitants. What ensued after was a battle of sheer might and power. It is said that the earth shook and the rivers and lakes boiled as the Makuta fought one another, and for an entire day the 2 sides bludgeoned and lacerated one another until they were exhausted and very injured. However, Uravak, Remain, and Alevin were not content to call it a draw and restart when all were well rested. Quickly, the 3 builders united their power and used it to make one final strike against their treacherous siblings, a strike that would cost all their lives, both the good siblings and the bad. Azravan, Calavid, and Elevode could not react in time to form a counterattack, and eventually the three villains were pinned and their forms were beginning to disappear. While it was too late to save themselves, the three evil Makuta were too wrathful to simply let this whole ordeal end with their demise. With the very last reserves of their powers, the three unleashed what is known today by the inhabitants as the Three Miseries, a series of curses that are what even now assault the poor Aguaran, Zigranites, and Varani. The first was from Elevode. He imposed his fury and madness upon the animals and plant life. As a result, despite many generations coming and going, all the animals on the island attack anything that moves, and many of the plants are aggressive and poisonous. The second misery was released by Calavid, which was a nasty species of parasite that's bite would wipe away its victims' memories and motor controls, forever turning them into clumsy, thoughtless fools that could never recover. The last and most cruel misery was created by Azravan, which was the perpetual curtain of storm clouds that always blotted out the sun and almost never stopped pouring rain on the inhabitants. Because of the constant shadow by the clouds and the constant state of just everything being wet, the air was always cold, making everything all the worse. The villagers, they could block out the animals with walls. The parasite, there wasn't much to be done for, but it struck rarely. But the rain was something that none could ever escape, making it the most cruel. As soon as the three miseries were released, the evil builders were completely destroyed, with only their creators remaining. As soon as the three miseries were released, the evil builders were completely destroyed with only their creations remaining. The curses, the tools, and everything else that they built. Uravak, Remain, and Elevine stood alive long enough to see with sorrow the miseries do their work, but the three builders did not have a single speck of energy left to do anything. Slowly the three began to turn to a sort of ash, and their remains blew away into the wind. As an unforeseen result of their final attack, all the creations Uravok, Remain, and Alevine had built began to dissolve and disintegrate just like their creators had. And soon there was literally nothing left standing that had been any reference to the three heroes. The inhabitants were distraught by these events, many angry that they had been betrayed by the Makuta, and just as many sobbing over the other Makuta's sacrifice. Regardless of how they felt over the builders, however, all soon realized that they had to do something before they were wiped out by the miseries. Many lost their lives to the animals, parasites, and the cold rain, and it was thought that all would eventually be wiped away. They would just become extinct. However, all these people were tough and intelligent, and they soon made villages that withstood the onslaught, villages that soon joined and became the city that is now Roako. They are still very afraid to venture outside the walls, however, and it is still quite difficult to live well under the conditions the three evil builders set for them. To make matters worse, in recent times a cult has come into form, a cult composed of many Okaline. They believe that if they somehow resurrect Azravan and the other two builders, then they can convince them to do away with the miseries and once again rule the inhabitants like they did before. The cult, known as the Lakravike, are stronger than many would like to credit them, and they have started to strong-arm many of the inhabitants into joining under threat of serious vandalism and possible death. Even the elders of Roako, who make their home in the Blue Fortress, have had difficulty stomping out and keeping under control the Lakravike. What makes the cult even more terrifying is the fact that they have recently been making use of certain artifacts, tools, and baubles that are what remain of the evil Makuta. and these artifacts grant the Lacrovike followers powers that have not been seen since the days of the Builder's rule. As hopeless as everything seems to have come, and as inevitable as it seems that the Lacrovike will be able to carry out their horrendous plans, there is a group of heroes with mysterious markings etched into their very beings that have appeared recently. They have power that equals the tools that the Lacrovike wield, and while it is unknown as to how they received these powers and what their purpose is exactly, it is believed by many, many hopeful inhabitants that these heroes will lead to the salvation of all on Roako. Alright, so that's basically it. That's all I've come up with so far. I hope that wasn't utterly boring. I'm reading from it, and I don't have any visual stuff to help aid it. I'm a terrible artist. But, if I were to restart BIONICLE, it would be along those lines. It has a couple of things, a couple of, themes and references to the other generations. The most obvious one, the Makuta. And the reason I called the builders the Makuta is because, I'm sure a lot of you are probably like, why would you do that? Some of them are good guys. The Makuta were bad guys. And that's kind of a reference to, like, not all the Makuta, at least in Generation 1, not all of them were bad. Okay, there was Mizrax, or whatever his name was, that was a good guy. He was a good guy, and even Krika from 2008 wasn't like he wasn't totally evil. And from what I hear, even the Makuta in Generation 2 wasn't exactly evil. He wasn't exactly like that. I don't know the details behind that, but I do hear that Makuta in Generation 2 wasn't all that bad, at least in the beginning. So yeah, that's why I called the builders Makuta as well, and there's 6 of them, which 6 Toa and all that stuff. But I tried to keep a couple of references to the other generations, but make this it's enough of its own thing to be unique. But yeah, let me know what you think in the comments. What do you think of all this? Is it interesting? Does it need some touch up? I'm sure there are plenty of plot holes that need to be plugged up. So yeah, just voice your opinions in the comments section, and see you later.